we're going to talk about a lot of bright and enthusiastic entrepreneurs in the audience who are very, very focused and optimistic on building amazing products for Indian and global customers. But sometimes it helps to also think about what can go wrong, right, amidst all this optimism. And some founders are naturally good at being paranoid. But if you are not paranoid yourself, sometimes it helps to bring in external expertise which can help you be paranoid about what can go wrong. So we're going to talk about risk. I know it's a little somber mood to start off today morning. But we're also going to talk about governance. Next slide, please. Which is essentially about how do you set systems and processes in place, right? How do you get the right people? How do you get the right processes to make sure that things are moving smoothly in gear? And for a startup, again, these are not easy to set in place, right? There is so much chaos. There is so many things which are changing. But it helps to build in the right amount of checks and balances during the journey because that's really what unlocks growth at later stages. And finally, we're going to talk about the heart, which is financial management, which is how do you manage your cash better? How do you think through working capital? How do you think through equity raises, debt raises, and capital structure? So these are some of the questions that we believe that young founders could have. And these are not easy questions for anyone to answer who doesn't have a financial background, right? You might understand some of the basic concepts of a P&L, balance sheet, and cash flows. But a lot of things like, what are the kind of disclosures, what teams do I build within the finance function, how do I actually set up some of the systems and processes, right? So these are some of the questions we hope to address with today's session. So we talked about the framework of the session. So let's just jump in, because we would like to keep the session a little more interactive. And so hence, towards the end of the session, we also would like to have a detailed interaction with Mr. Natwar, who is the CFO of The Hearth. So moving to risk, right? I think a lot of you guys, you guys might be still early in the journey. I think for a early stage startup, the risk that we see as investors, and just having seen so many patterns across so many companies, the biggest risk at the early stage is actually trying to figure out what to build and will it work, right? So this is what investors call concept risk or PMF risk. PMF stands for product market fit. So whatever which you're building, does that actually resonate with your customers, right? Are customers asking for it? Is it solving a genuine problem? And are customers willing to pay for it? I think all of these are very, very tricky questions, and founders usually spend most of their time focused on this, right? And investors actually spend most of their time at early stages looking at product market fit. And does a business really have a right to exist? So this is a very existential question. And at early stages, we believe actually that the founder is best equipped to deal with this, right? How do we iteratively build? How do we not spend a lot of time building things which may or may not resonate within the marketplace, right? So the tricks here are probably to start with small things, keep checking your hypothesis within the market, and keep iterating, keep refining, keep changing track as your customers give you feedback. At later stages, and a lot of today's session will also focus on what happens as you graduate to later stages. Execution becomes critical, and execution everybody talks about how ideas are a very, very small part of building a business. It's actually execution which matters. At later stages, that becomes really, really important. As you have hundreds to thousands of team members, customers, vendors, and people you work with, how do you keep the company on track? How do you keep the engine on the rails in some sense? And that's where it really becomes important to start setting systems and processes in place, right? And this is where the solo founder kind of mentality of, I will try and figure out the business doesn't work. This is where you need a delegated responsibilities within the team. You need checks and balances. You need a strong finance function to help you manage for execution risk. And finally, there is regulatory and reputational risk. While this is important, even at earlier stages, you cannot break the law. It becomes very, very significant as you move towards being a permanent institution and a public company, or any large-scale company, right? Because that's when the regulators' focus also comes on you. And startups, by definition, are doing new things. They're trying out very different kind of models. And that's where there are natural conflicts with regulations which do not anticipate all the new things that they're doing. And that's why it's important to have proper legal advice, a proper well-functioning board, independent directors, and several other kind of more serious checks and balances which can help you get to an institutional kind of scale. So these are the some of the operational risks that we believe. Some of the financial risks, of course, at early stages, how do you just have enough cash to stay alive, right? And we're going to talk about some of that a little later. But just staying alive, raising enough capital to have enough runway to actually execute and test out different hypotheses. That's probably the most important thing for a young business. Again, as you grow, while that continues to stay important, we see even some very large-scale businesses having to struggle with limited cash. But the ones which are making progress and hopefully moving towards sustainability, they are looking at specific line items on their P&L and their balance sheet, and how do they improve that in a continuous way, right? So how do you improve margins? How do you improve your working capital? How do you improve some of the capex outlay that you have? How do you think through your payback periods better? And what are the kinds of predictability that you can build into the business model, right? And again, as you move towards later stages, you're moving towards public markets, then return on capital becomes important, right? So which is why investors invest in you in the first place. Which is that if you are putting 100 rupees of capital into the business, how much are you really getting out, right? And this is when a business turns profitable, it's starting to generate cash flows. Then you look at how to make that sustainable and efficient. So, so these are some of the financial risks. We're going to talk a little bit more about financial management, and there's a lot of content on the slides, but I'll skim through, and again, towards the end of the sessions, we are open to Q&As if any of this is a big question. But essentially, some thumb rules here. When you're looking for a capital raise, I think, again, that's the most important question for a lot of young startups. How do I get money, right? Don't necessarily say yes to the first investor. Just like you are looking for investors, investors are also looking for opportunities, right? And it has to be a good fit. And it seems like, something, a matter of luxury, right? That you choose your investor. But it's critically important, and most later stage businesses, if you ask them, what are the one or two things that they would change, they would say, either I wish I had brought in this investor, or I wish I had not brought in this kind of investor. Doing that early in the journey has a huge implication on how the business will turn out. So choose people who are the right partners for your business, who have the right expertise to help you build. Speak to the other portfolio companies of any investor you're speaking to. Get feedback, do your own diligence, just like investors do their diligence, right? Now, how much to raise, right? I think most companies look to raise hopefully around 18 to 20 months. These thumb rules change over time in different markets, especially in, I think, 2021, people raised for shorter periods of time because they wanted to show more growth and raise more quickly. But as kind of prudent business owners, we feel at least 18 to 20 months of time is what a capital raise event should give you. And look at structuring that as a combination of equity and debt, depending on the stage of your business. Look at managing for your cash flows. and for your dilution at the same time, right? So one of the things which people don't necessarily understand is that equity, when you're bringing somebody on board as an equity partner, you're also giving up a stake in the business, right? And so it is dilutive capital. Debt is non-dilutive, but it has other obligations. So there is a right balance usually of equity and debt. And sometimes, again, founders might not be aware of how to think this through, right? There are some, obviously, texts and theory in business schools, but it often helps to get practical advice. Bring in, if you can't bring in a full-time CFO, at least speak to people within the ecosystem who can advise you and guide you on thinking through capital structure better. Finally, I think once you've raised all this capital, what do you use it for, right? The business will have expenses. And thinking through what are going to be the structure of these expenses, how do you keep the business nimble and flexible so that if there is a market downturn, you're able to cut down on some of the discretionary costs. While at the same time, if you see opportunities, how can you double down and help the business grow to the next level? So discretionary costs, typically as investors, when we look at it, we think of marketing. Some elements of marketing are discretionary. Typically your team elements are not so discretionary because you would have thought through what are your requirements on the team and hopefully hired a little rationally so that you don't have to cut those down in tough times. But in very tricky situations, sometimes even the team expenses may be discretionary. CapEx is definitely discretionary. So how much capital you invest for growth initiatives, and you will naturally respond to different market environments when you're looking to do CapEx, when you're looking to spend on marketing, large brand campaigns, ad campaigns. At early stages, it's very important to have most of your spends less fixed in nature, more linked to business outcomes. So if they're more variable, more discretionary, it helps you stay alive longer, right? And anticipate many different situations. On working capital, again, some of the B2B startups in this space might appreciate this better, but this is always a problem in India. Customers do not pay in a timely manner, and you have stretching of receivables, you have inventory requirements. And it's critical to manage this. I think at early stages, companies do not necessarily have the negotiating power or leverage to ensure early or timely payment. But at later stages, you definitely need processes around this because this can sink a lot of capital as you're looking to grow. So, and when I say processes, again, the best tool to do this is to bring in experienced finance team, financial controllers, a CFO, who can help you manage your receivables better, chase customers in a structured fashion, negotiate contracts appropriately. But this can be, actually, we've seen for a lot of companies serving other businesses or working with enterprises, this can be a huge sink of capital. And it really interferes with growth unless you manage it well. And this is actually one of the areas where we think debt can play a very, very interesting part. Because if you're looking to block your growth capital, which is your equity, working capital might not afford you the best kind of returns versus raising lower cost debt capital often is much more efficient. Finally, on treasury and liquidity, this is again a great problem to have. If you have liquidity, if you have a sizable treasury, you want to run it efficiently, right? And running it efficiently essentially means thinking through what are going to be your cash requirements, being able to predict, I need some cash for, burn in the next 3 months. I need some cash for burn in the next 6 months after that, and I need some cash for working capital, I need some cash for CapEx. And then allocating the cash that you have so that it meets those requirements efficiently, right? So you don't want to park everything in a current account, which is not earning you any returns. And when you don't need that money, you would prefer to park it in safer but slightly longer term instruments. And there is a variety of instruments which can help you do that. Finally, on governance, we'll spend the next 5 minutes, but for those who are interested in this session, we've done a lot of work with IVCA and Deloitte. We've put out reports on what are the appropriate kind of checks and balances to build into the business. I think for an early stage founder, the most important thing to keep in mind is almost everything needs a maker and a checker, right? When you have probably 50, 100 customers, probably the founder and the couple of senior guys can manage that process. But when you have large teams, when you have a large number of customers, it's impossible to manage without a system in place. And the system needs to have one of the guiding principles, which is nothing can be approved by 2 eyes, what we call the 4 eyes principle, right? So 4 eyes, matlab 2 people. So 2 people have to look at every transaction, every approval. And assuming that you've hired people with the right intent, you have the right intent, having this kind of check and balance only strengthens the company, right? So obviously nothing can really solve for intent. But this helps you at least build a strong foundation for growth. Having said that, at an early stage, there are certain legal requirements. There is the Companies Act. I think a lot of young businesses might get more familiar with it as you raise capital, as you set up a board. But having a company secretary, either in-house or outsourced, having a chartered accountant, financial controller, having a legal advisor, and having a functioning board, right? These are the basics. And you have to start off with this, even if you are pretty much maybe on day 1 or day 2 of running your business. And so start talking within the ecosystem, try and understand, who are the right kind of partners for these kind of roles. And bring these on early in your journey, because these are the folks who are going to help you as you scale. And you cannot afford to not have these people on board. So having started with that, then as you grow, there are several elements to put in place. Again, given that most of you guys are still early in your journey, probably we will not spend a lot of time on it. But one of the things that I just wanted to highlight, one of the things which most of our companies tell us, while there is a statutory audit, right? So there's an external auditor who comes in and looks at your books of accounts. As you reach a Series B level, definitely consider doing an internal audit process. That's where founders have told us and given us very strong feedback that an internal audit process is actually what helps them fix any holes in the system, right? An external audit is once a year. It's much more external looking. And it doesn't tell you how to fix problems, it just highlights problems. I think internal audit is much more granular and a much more interactive process. And it's highly recommended for companies who have at least reached the Series B level. Finally, on reporting and investor relations, investors will tell you what they need, but being proactive helps, right? And even before you raise capital, one of the things that we've seen amongst founders, send updates to your investors, right? The good, the bad, whatever progress you're making, things that have worked for you, things which have not worked for you. Monthly kind of updates just help, right? And we've seen actually that helps companies raise capital, because no investor might be comfortable with your idea or your business on day 1. But as they see you make progress and they see you regularly keep in touch, a lot of investors build that confidence and are willing to double down and bet on you. So just keep that in mind. And I think this is true for most things, but particularly in investor relations, just maintain regular lines of communication. On compliance, again, this is not meant as legal advice, but of course we have to stay in compliance with the laws of the land. And I would just say get the right legal advice. Start with your chartered accountant and your company secretary, but definitely do explore external legal advice as well, which might be relevant depending on the scale of the business. External independent directors will probably be a little later in the journey, but we will also spend some time with Mr. Natwar, and we can explore some of the right kind of thumb rules to think of when looking at bringing in external independent directors, well-experienced CFOs, and things like that. And finally, on disclosures, yeah, we've talked about those, but I think the reason we mentioned this here is because there have been a few cases of misgovernance in the last few months, and that's a reason this is absolutely top of mind for most investors. There are cases, and it could be errors of omission, it could be errors of commission, so there might be intent issues in a couple of cases, but often what we see is it's just due to lack of the right checks and balances, right? So we saw companies creating fake invoices, companies selling on credit given by third parties where the customers are not even aware that this credit was provided and the nature of the credit. There were vendors, specific vendors where a lot of invoices were exchanged where the underlying transactions did not happen. And this can get you into a whole lot of trouble, both with tax authorities and regulation. So obviously, and most founders, I would believe, do not intend to do any of these things. But in the course of the journey, under certain pressures, they might lose focus on certain key elements of the business, and it's important to avoid that. And that's really the purpose of this session today. Thanks, everyone. I think we would just like to spend the next 15 odd minutes with Mr. Natwar Agarwal. He's an extremely experienced CFO who has built multiple companies, often from scratch. So even his time with large enterprises like Walmart, he literally helped build the business out in India to a 20,000 crore scale. In his time at CFO at DeHaat, he's again seen the journey from very early stages to the scale that it has reached today, right? And we have all heard of DeHaat. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Natwar. I will have a few questions for him, and then we can open it up for Q&A.
Hello.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me now? Better? Thanks.
Thanks, Natwar. Thanks for joining us and being a part of this session. I think a lot of the founders can learn from your experiences here. I think, and just to introduce, we have had a long relationship with DeHaat at Trifecta Capital as well. We were one of the first lenders in the business. And we've actually seen the journey, from very close quarters, and we are very impressed by what they have built, right? It's probably the largest agri-tech player in India right now, and which is huge. So, Natwar, I think one of the things we wanted to mention and ask for your advice on, we are talking about governance, we're talking about risk management. A lot of the founders here are very optimistic. They're trying to build out new businesses, which itself is a huge risk, right? So do you think an overt focus on risk management is actually appropriate for early stage founders? And does it interfere with their optimism and their, path forward?
Sure, Arijit, I think I got your point. So what I will like to do is let it more interactive, in the sense, I'm fine. So before I answer Arijit's question, corporate governance subject is, let look at little holistically, right? It's a very subject which is a vast, coverage. So let's understand, what do you guys understand about corporate governance, right? So before I talk about a little bit about corporate governance, any of you want to just share what do you guys understand by corporate governance, or as you guys have just started your businesses, anyone who want to share that what do you guys understand about corporate governance? Yeah, absolutely. So basically, corporate governance start from as the organization scale up into different stages, it is basically start from the intent and the transparency, right? Our stakeholders really what they want is the full transparency. Arijit talks about that we should have a recurring information presentations or sharing of information to the investors. So it talks about to start with the real transparency into system. Nobody wants to have surprises, and so we have to have a system where we share each and every information to the stakeholders very transparently. And now comes about the stages, right? So as we start, we have to have a right kind of a people, right kind of a policy. We talk about revenue recognition. So we have to have a right kind of accounting policies where we record our transactions, close our monthly numbers, keep a track on policies which are more transparent and complied with the law. We have various laws like Companies Act, the Income Tax Act, the FDI rules. So the basic requirement is that we meet all the basic requirements and publish the financial accounts to the investor transparent manner with a timely manner. So that's the starting point. Then as we keep growing, there are stages like we get more external auditors in place, we get more external consultant in place, we get a better stat auditors, we put a system in place. So everything is stage by stage. It's a journey we have to meet with. It is not that we have to do everything in a first day. There are stages that we have to comply with. Like I'll just share with you my experience, right? So when I joined Dehat about 2 years back, just talking about numbers here, we were doing about 50 CR business monthly. Today we are clocking 400 CR, right? So prepare from 50 CR to 400 CR monthly numbers. You have to have a backbone of the organization where we can scale up that way, which is a right system. Like we recognize the need for implementing SAP. We realize the need for having inventory audits. We realize the need for, more specifically or more importantly, of the right team and the right structures, right? So getting the right team and right structures in place for that kind of a scale up is also very important. So as I said, system, process, people, transparency and complied with the laws are the major constraint and the major need for the corporate governance. Any questions? Anything more clarification?
No, that's interesting. I think one of the messages I picked up is, look at it as a very stage-wise process and think
Correct.
about it as a continuous improvement, right? So nobody will have all the processes in place on day one, right? But how do you make it better? And continuously, if you have that mindset of continuously trying to make it better, by the time you are ready for investors of different flavors, of different forms, you will actually have a lot of what you need in place.
I think it's not a subject where, we have to keep in mind, it is very said, as I said, basic ingredient of any corporate governance is the transparency. So if we all have transparency in our mind, and, so that's where everything will fall in place. So that's the basic rule which we all have to keep in mind as we develop organizations for a larger scale. And as I said, that all governance process system are stages by stages. There are stages defined in the law itself. Like after 200 CR of business, you have to have an external internal auditor. So there are stages defined in the law, but having you can define yourself also based on the stages. You see that how your business is going to shape up in the times to come.
Understand. So, Natwar, I think in your okay, I think then in that case, let's keep it open to questions from the audience rather than this.
Any questions like anything you guys want to know, like which stage you are in, what kind of a help you need, what kind of a support you need, any clarification? Yes, sir, please.
Hi, this is Sushant from Adira Packaging. I have a question. So for non-funded startups who are doing sizable turnover, how do we hire for finance? We know how to hire for accounts. We are not in a position to hire a CFO. So how do we hire for finance? What markers do we see? I hope you got my question. I'm not able to.
Yeah. So I think as you said that, so we all understand difference between a financial controller as a CFO and a CFO, right? So you need someone who can ensure that your basic accounting policies and recording of the transaction are in place. But having said that, you should have someone who can guide you towards the meeting the financial objectives, like as I said, tracking your working capital, talking to the banks, talking for more ideas, how to maintain a financial discipline. When you invest, you have to calculate ROIs and stuff. So these are the mixture, and this kind of a right kind of a people you have to search. So, but in these days you have a certain organization also who kind of help you as a CFO organization from outside also. So if you're not able to hire a CFO in the organization, you can head them as you can have them as a consulting partners and take advice on the overall financial matters. So they will work with you from outside on a timely manner. So you can have a CFO from outside. So once you're in a position to hire a full-time CFO, please do it ASAP, as soon as you can. Don't postpone. This is an investment any organization should do for a future stability and future growth of the organization.
Great. I think we are out of time. I'm sure you are here for the day, and Arijit and Rahul is here. So I think you can have your questions. But thank you, gentlemen, for great session. Let's have a round of applause for such a great session. So,
Thank you.
yeah, no, just so.